Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. This podcast is dedicated to the millions of family caregivers who want wellness tips and self-care solutions, who seek expert advice, and who want news about healthy aging and how to create well home design in our forever homes. I'm Sherri, a corporate gerontologist, author, and educator, a TV interviewer, host, and news commentator. I'm joining you from Southern California, where our interviews and news take us all across the country to explore the many ways to help you on your caregiving journey and to lift you up here at Caregiving Club On Air. Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. I'm Sherri, a gerontologist and your host, and we have so much great information to share with you this month of September that we're actually going to deliver 2 episodes this month, and this is going to be our first episode. So first of all, I'm very excited that we were able to snag a great interview with our guest for this episode, who is Susan Ryan, the CEO of the Greenhouse Project, which is a senior living, assisted living, skilled nursing community. We're going to tell you all about it, and Susan is going to share so much great insider information, and that's to celebrate National Assisted Living Week, which kicks off on September 8th. And then, of course, in September, we're also celebrating Healthy Aging Month, but most importantly, National Self-Care Month. We just finished National Wellness Month in August. Now we're going to segue into National Self-Care Month, which is perfect for me. That's why my book came out around this time last year, because I wanted to blend the wellness and the self-care routines. And so my book, Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life, as you guys well know, is going to be, I'm going to share a few tips and things from the book, and also our Me Time Monday wellness hack at the end of every episode. We're going to focus on how to make Me Time Monday work for you and make sure that you become successful in your self-care practices. But as I said, September is also Healthy Aging Month. We're also going to be celebrating Grandparents' Day on September 10th, as well as National Centenarian Day, which is on September 22nd. That's when we celebrate all our 100-year-olds. And we're going to return to one of our popular segments called Pop Culture, where I'm going to share with you a movie review on the movie Thelma, if you haven't seen it, as well as talk a little bit about Coastal Grandmother, which we did a couple of years ago on our podcast, but also talk about a new movement called the Unstoppables, which is something the New York Times has been covering, and it's all about older adults and thriving into our later years. So that's going to be really great stuff for all of our caregiver wellness news. And then as we go into well home design news, I want to talk a little bit about the cost of senior living. I'm going to give you a really great online resource and tool, because we know financial wellness is one of my 7 elements of wellness. To find that balance, so we have to make sure we understand the cost of long-term care and longevity. I'm also going to tell and share with you my experience this summer with my Swedish death cleaning project. Yes, you heard that right. I'm going to explain what that is, but it's been really, really interesting and eye-opening. And then finally, I'm going to wrap this all up, because I want to share my thoughts on the 23rd anniversary of September 11th. And I've made a promise when that tragic day occurred to never forget. I can't believe it's been 23 years. I'm going to share a few things that are going on in that area where it really relates to our own health and longevity, what has happened to a lot of the first responders from 9/11. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be a really interesting kind of commentary and some news and things that I want to share with you, along with all the other news that we've got going on. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to end with our Me Time Monday wellness hack on how to practice Me Time Monday. And as we know, I'm going to break it down into the 3 elements of Me Time Monday. Me is your focus. Time, it's only going to take you a few minutes. And then Monday is going to be your recipe for success in your self-care practices. So stay tuned. And with that, we're going to take a look now at Caregiver Wellness News. So So, as I mentioned, last month was August National Wellness Month, and we've now segued into September National Self Care Month. Perfect time for me. And as I mentioned, my book, Me Time Monday, but I wanted to share with you some recent data that's come out that I thought was really fascinating. So, this is actually from the pharmaceutical company Sanofi, and they had done a survey about self care globally. And here's some statistics if we practice better self care. I just thought this was interesting. So, $119 billion self care activities generate $119 billion in monetary and healthcare workforce savings globally. So, in other words, if we're healthier and we're giving ourselves those breaks that we need, it's actually going to help the overall performance of the company and the workplace environment and employers and all of that. So I thought that was interesting. As you guys know, I do a lot of work with employers. So this one really hit home for me in terms of this information. It also said that self-care receives or relieves a burden on healthcare providers, saving 1.8 billion hours of physician times, again, across the globe. Kind of interesting stats, right? I mean, sometimes I know the numbers get a little boring, but when we think about we are really the ones in charge, we have the power over our bodies, over our minds to be healthier, be happier. I think sometimes we're always looking and seeking for some kind of pill or shot or program or something that's going to give this to us. And yet we don't realize that we actually are the ones that give that gift to ourselves. When we practice self-care, we become healthier, we become happier, which is kind of what my book was really all about. So during this National Self-Care Awareness Month, and particularly for family caregivers, because I know how difficult it is to try to carve out that time that's just about you. And I think the fallacy is that we look very often at me time as being selfish. And as the great Maya Angelou said, self-care is not selfish, it is self-full. And I think these numbers bear that out. The more that we can also take care of ourselves as well as all of the loved ones in our lives, we are all going to be better off and benefit from it. So my message to you, particularly again, those family caregivers out there, is that you really want to own and earn your me time. And what I mean by that is, again, it's you have the agency. It's within your own power to make sure that you're getting those breaks, to make sure that you're pausing for a moment. And as you'll see throughout my book and also throughout the wellness hack that we're going to do at the end of this episode, self-care does not mean big chunks of time. It doesn't mean a lot of financial outlay and costs that you have to incur. It really can be small little minutes, whether you find that during the day or find it just during the week. And you really don't have to spend a lot of money. That's kind of the fallacy, I think, sometimes of a lot of these wellness marketing messages and things that are out there that make us feel worse because we're not, Gwyneth Paltrow, even though we don't want to be. But it's hard to have that perfect life, and that's not what wellness is about. It's not about perfection. It's about simply taking steps and working towards a greater whole and really towards balance. It's not about consumerism. It's not about finding that one path. It really is about looking at all these elements in your life and finding that balance. And again, that was what my book was really all about. I something that kind of relates to this, I came across an article from The Guardian, and I wanted to share it with you because it was about cleanses and detox programs. And, we see these things and these trends happen all the time. And they've happened for decades and decades and actually probably centuries across time. But what was really interesting in this article is it said that detoxification is a popular claim in wellness, but it's really just another lie. And they talked about all the juice fasts and cleanses and supplements and sauna sessions and everything out there that talks about detoxifying your body. But it's really misleading. And a lot of these practices make you feel better, or at least they might make you feel like you are doing something for yourself, but they don't really lead to weight loss that's sustainable. It's really more of a placebo effect. They don't really lead to happiness in your life because it's just fleeting. It's not, doesn't have a, a long lasting effect that some of these other things that I talk about, where we're blending spiritual wellness, intellectual wellness, social wellness, all these different elements of life that we can touch upon and spend a few moments really investing in our own joy economy, as I call it, really is something that's going to help us a lot more than going to the sauna. Now, I'm all for spa days. Don't get me wrong. I do this with my girlfriends, and it's fun, but it's really more of the social part of it. Although some of the massages and stuff do feel good, but again, those are moments, and you can accumulate them, but using that as your only wellness practice is not going to get you where you need to be. And so in my book, I wrote about some of these placebo effects, by the way, for the gentleman out there. The Dr. Monkey Gland chapter, I think you'll find very, very interesting. That was the biggest placebo effect in history, at least our modern history that we know it. And as I mentioned, I know that Goop as a 250, I think, million or billion, I can't remember. It's in the book, but it's a huge company, and Gwyneth Paltrow has been very, very successful, really capturing this attention around wellness. But when you have to spend $188 on a candle or $18,000 on 18 karat gold weights so you can work out and do, bodybuilding and all that other stuff, that's not wellness. It's called consumer marketing. And, power to you, but it's really not wellness. Wellness is about ancient practices. It's about things that are essentially free in our world, because so much of it has to do with how we interact with nature and our environment and our relationships that we create. And it's very personal. I talk about wellness is also not prescriptive, because when someone says to you, do this and you will have better wellness, that's not wellness. Even me, even when I say to you, do this and you'll have better, but book tells you wellness is instructive. Okay. What I try to do is give you a lot of good information. I try to tell you why this information can be beneficial, or why these certain practices or tips can be beneficial, but it's all up to you to synthesize that into your own life. Some things will work, some things won't, some things you agree with, some things you won't. But that, again, I'm going to give you enough, and I'm going to give it to you across these 7 elements of wellness. So those, just to recapture, it's, your physical, your emotional, your social, your intellectual, your environmental, your financial, and your spiritual. Those are your 7 elements of life. Finding small moments in those areas and how they blend together and support each other is what sustains us and gives us that better self-care, happiness, health, longevity, and all the things that we're talking about this month. And so the other thing too that's very interesting is I talk about in our modern world, and I talk about something called Kawanakwatsi. That is a Hopi Indian, the native Indian tribe that has this word Kawanakwatsi, which means life out of balance. And in our modern world, it's about all the technology we have in our lives. How do we balance that with the nature that we crave, that our brains crave? And there's a lot of science behind this in terms of brain health, but we really do need to figure out how to, unplug, if you will, and really enjoy the nature that's around us, and not just get caught up in all of this technology. And the choice overload is a big part of that. It really just overwhelms our brains. And I'll share with you some other research that's being done, but it's mentally draining when you have too many choices sometimes. And that's what a lot of this technology has done. Not only the noise pollution that we get from all the technology and the blue light emissions, which are bad for our sleep, and all of these other things. So what we want to do is we want to just be really careful about making sure we can find that balance between the technology that we need. But so technology is not bad, but technology can't take over your life. So let me play off of that for a minute, because it is Healthy Aging Month, and that doesn't mean just for older people. I'm talking about everybody from the womb to the tomb, the kids, the teenagers, the young Gen Z, all the way up through, our silent generation, our 90, and we're going to talk in a minute about 100-year-olds. There was a really great study that came out about TV health habits as when you were a kid dictate your health as an adult. Now, I really jumped on this one because I'm a child of the 70s, basically, is when my formative years, and we had television, but we only had like 7 channels. We didn't have 1,000 or more, or whatever it is that you get now. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have computers. We didn't have smartphones. So we weren't consuming all of all of this content. And it's really interesting because what this study found is that they were looking at people, for the most part, who were age 45. And that age group, those people that spent more time watching television as a kid and a youngster and a teenager, they had higher blood pressure, higher rates of obesity. They used oxygen less efficiently during exercise than those who watched fewer hours of television. So again, it's learning how to create balance. It's not saying TV is bad or YouTube, and I know social media now, TikTok and all this kind of stuff. I mean, be careful. We'll go into all the dangers of social media on another episode, but you want to balance out with your kids being outside, breathing fresh air, learning, walking, moving, learning how to, really immerse themselves with their 5 senses. That is going to be better for their health than all of this great technology. And also it's going to help brain health. We're so really interested now in brain health, which has really kind of come about in the last 20 years. And it's something I've been really focused on, is kind of this, the neuroplasticity and all the things that we need to understand. Just a couple more things in this kind of same vein, because I wanted to share it with many of you I know out there are sandwich generation. So you have maybe older parents or in-laws or loved ones you're caring for, but you might also have kids or younger children who have maybe come home from college and are still under your roof. So this is interesting. A 2019 report found that teenagers in the U.S., basically Gen Z born after 1996, spent an average of 7 hours a day on their screens, not counting the time that they needed to do schoolwork. And then another study that was done that same year found that kids under the age of 3 spent more than twice as much time in front of their screen. So again, that's a computer, a smartphone, a TV screen, whatever it is, than kids did in 1997. Now, there's cause and effect. And as a scientist, we're very careful and cautious about saying, if you do this, this will happen or whatever. But I don't think there's any mystery in the fact that in the 1960s, 3% of our population had mental health issues. Okay. And today, it's 21%. And it's really affecting a lot of our younger generation. So think about that for a minute. A lot of these things are factored in. And in fact, the U.S. Surgeon General, I think I mentioned this on another episode, he put out a report this year that said there needs to be warning labels on social media, particularly for people under the age of 18. Because it can be detrimental. It can be detrimental to mental health, brain health, and how your brain grows, because we know your brain continues to grow up through age 27, 28. So it still has a lot of growth that it needs to happen, and we're really impacting that. So one of the things that you want to do is, you want to do that detox. You want to have more balance. You want to try to help your kids find areas in these 7 elements, as well as yourself, to find that balance. But that becomes more of a happiness pursuit, I think, for a lot of us, than when we think about wellness being the gym or a new diet or, a new cleanse or something like that. The other thing is, just really quickly about television, because I'm going to be making a whole lot of TV appearances this month. It's also, next episode, we're going to talk more about Alzheimer's and dementia, because it is World Alzheimer's Month this month in September. So I'm going to be doing a lot of television. It's going to be a little bit of a crazy month. So I'm trying to get a little bit more fit. I kind of, had a great summer. But what's really interesting is there was a study that came out is, why do our brains resist working out if we're not already into a workout routine? And that's the magic. The magic word there is routine. And I know I'm a habitual person, but everybody is more successful when you have a routine. Caring for someone with dementia or Alzheimer's is critical to have a routine for them, but also for you. So thinking about routines becomes really essential. And when we're working out, and maybe we have a certain goal, or we're trying to just get a little bit better fit or move more or whatever, it's that dopamine release. Because once you start feeling good from moving more or doing a meditation or whatever it is, or maybe eating a little bit more cleanly, you do start to create almost this reward system inside your brain where the dopamine release is happening, and now you're craving that. And the way to keep it going, because we could fall off, the rails, and there's ice cream over there and french fries over here, or whatever it is, when you can come back to, okay, I can maybe self-indulge a little bit, but then I got to get back to it. But it's that routine that keeps you successful. And that's what we're going to talk about with Me Time Monday, because the Monday is the routine part of your self-care program. It's going to keep you on track and make you feel good. So I just wanted to bring that up, said that was interesting. And also, just as we're talking about television, I want to do a shout out because it is September Healthy Aging Month. And I did already an appearance on a TV network that is actually Inside the Villages, which is one of our senior living communities here in Southern California. And the program is called Let's Talk Tech with Debbie. So I want to do a shout out to Debbie Dotson, who is the host of that show. And she had me on for this month. And we talked about how to stay healthy longer. We talked about using technology to sharpen our brains, move our bodies, and get better sleep. So I'm going to have a link to that episode on our episode guide page. You guys can check that out. Now let's move on to Grandparents' Day, which is on September 10th, and also National Centenarians' Day, which is, where we celebrate our 100-year-olds, which is on September 22nd. So this is where we haven't done pop culture in a while, and I wanted to bring that back because there's some kind of fun stuff going on in that area. First of all, a little shout out. Season 2, episode 13, we did the coastal grandmother trend, and a lot of people are still into that. And so I wanted to bring that up. And I'm going to mention that episode again, but you may want to go back and check that out because that was a really fun episode. But the grandmother hypothesis for my book was, why do women live longer? And there's a lot of science and hypotheses about this, but the grandmother hypothesis is that, again, millions, thousands of years ago, as we were living out on the African savannah and we were living in tribes, and even when we started to wander, as humans across different areas, what was happening is within these groups, the older women who no longer were fertile, they still could help care and nurture for the younger of the tribe, while the young moms continued to have more children. And that wasn't necessarily the role of the grandfather. Now, it's not to say that granddads can't be nurturing, but it's a really interesting hypothesis, because what they found is there was a purpose then for these women in these groups to live longer so they could be around to help care for the grandchildren. And that might be one of the reasons why women tend to live anywhere from 3 to 5 years longer typically than men. It's interesting. And I think that a lot of us today, because we don't necessarily live close to our families, we lose that kind of help, right? Now, many of you out there do have help, maybe from your mom, or kids who remember, like I did growing up a couple years, we lived with my grandparents, and my grandmother was such a big inspiration in my life. So it's a really interesting hypothesis, something to think about. But I think it also shows that the family unit is a strengthening unit. It not only helps us build resiliency, but also survivability. And the more that we can try to protect those familial ties and those supports becomes really important. So, listen, I know there's things where you get a great job and you have to move across the country or whatever, but there is definitely benefits built in to sometimes having, particularly our grandmothers around. And like I said, grandfathers have their own role in our lives that is really special and important, but that might be why women live longer. Now, moving on to a couple other pop culture, I did a movie review on the movie Thelma. If you haven't seen this, it's fantastic. It stars 93-year-old June Squibb, who plays a 90-year-old in the picture, and it talks about her relationship with her grandson, her older adult grandson, but it also talks about the scams that can happen with our grandparents. And again, going back to that coastal grandma, episode that we did, season 2, episode 13, we also talked to Liz Lowy, who is the COO of EverSafe, and she gave us a real good download on grandparent scams. So go back and check that out, because that's something you need to be in tune with that could happen to your older loved one. You need to know what these scammers do, how they operate, and what to kind of be aware of to help protect our older loved ones. But anyway, that was a really great movie, and I'll have my movie review up on the episode guide page for you. Then finally, the New York Times is doing a series called The Unstoppables, and I thought this is really fascinating. What they're doing is they're focusing on people who are older, typically over the age of 75, who are still out there thriving, contributing, leading things, doing things, not just sitting in the Barca Lounge or watching Jeopardy kind of, perception that some people have of older adults. And in fact, Pew Research said that workers age 75 and older are the fastest growing workforce age group. Now, again, I work with a lot of employers, so I honed in on that particular study and went, whoa, okay, this is really interesting. And I think what's happening is they're quadrupling in size since 1964, and it's a real culture shift. And I think that our workplaces are really transforming, and we are looking at mentorships and how do we also make sure that our younger generations have opportunities if our older generations are still in the workforce. But we also see a lot of entrepreneurism as people get older. In fact, the fastest growing entrepreneur group are not, the really 20-year-old brainiacs and innovators in Silicon Valley. It's actually people over the age of 50 who are coming up with their own ideas or doing an encore career, or whatever it is. I mean, I probably fall into that group, right? Because I'm in part of that age group, and I've kind of created my own business and my own thing here. So it really is interesting, but it's called The Unstoppables. I told my mom, who's 80, who's still working, and she has a couple of friends in their 80s that are still working. I said, hey, you're part of this really cool thing called The Unstoppables. And she got a big smile on her face. So I know that she felt good about that. But it's something to just think about, whether it's Martha Stewart or, some of these other icons that are older that are out there, they're still thriving and working in the areas they want to work in, is really interesting. And I think it's also inspirational for those of us who are looking at possibly living for another 20 to 30 years. So that's our caregiver wellness news. Now we're going to go into this great interview with Susan Ryan. I was so excited to snag this interview with Susan because she travels all the time, super busy. She is the wonderful CEO of something called the Greenhouse Project, which is actually something I wrote about in my first book, A Cast of Caregivers. She's going to tell us all about the Greenhouse Project. And this is the kind of assisted living that we all want to live in. Okay. So those of you who are out there thinking maybe about assisted living for your loved ones, you're going to want to listen to what Susan has to say, because it's fascinating and they really have a very unique model. And so here's my interview with Susan Ryan, CEO of the Greenhouse Project. So I'm so excited to have our guest on this episode, who is Susan Ryan, the CEO of the Greenhouse Project. And as I've mentioned before, I've written about the Greenhouse Project in my first book. And I think you're going to learn some things from Susan that are really illuminating about assisted living and the different approach the Greenhouse Project takes from all other, assisted living that you see out there and skilled nursing. And I think it's just going to be a really wonderful interview, and we're going to learn more. So Susan, welcome to Caregiving Club On Air.
Well, thank you so much, Sherri. I appreciate you asking me to be your guest.
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, we always talk to our guests and we always ask, where are we talking to you from today? Where are you today?
Well, the irony is that I'm in my office in Baltimore, Maryland. It's actually just probably 5 minutes from the BWI airport. I typically am on the road constantly, so it's a rare moment that you find me in my office.
I was going to say, I know you do a lot of traveling, so I wasn't sure what you were going to tell us today, but it's great to know. So you're located in Baltimore, Maryland. But tell us a little bit more about the Greenhouse Project, because as I mentioned, you really take a very different approach to this concept that we all know of assisted living and senior living. And so tell us more about what the Greenhouse Project is.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective as a nurse who's been in the field for decades now, it's the most radical, comprehensive approach. It really is deinstitutionalizing the physical spaces and the philosophical cultures that have really defined long-term care broadly, be it assisted living or skilled nursing. It's creating in a physical environment a real home. I mean, what a concept, a small, real home, 10 to 12 people living in private rooms with private bathrooms, centered around kind of an open concept. I mean, a home that you or I would want to live in. The virtual space that you see on our Zoom screen is a greenhouse home. And that is actually the den of a greenhouse home. I love it when people say, "Oh, is that your home?" I'm like, "Oh, I wish it were my home," because it's a place I would want to live in. So real home is one of the first core values that define greenhouse, that physical space. But we don't stop there. It's really what moves into it. What is that philosophical culture that enables people to live a meaningful and purposeful life? And that is really what we want the person that is living there to really be in the driver's seat and to be able to direct what he or she would be doing in that day. So a lot of autonomy and control, even with those that are living with mild to severe forms of cognitive impairment. And last but not least, it's really the worker, and it's an empowered staff. That's the third core value. And we want to make sure that those that are working closest to the elder, the residents, we want to make sure that they are empowered to deliver a meaningful life to that person, to really be in deep knowing relationships that will, I know who you are. I know what's important to you to be able to live a meaningful life. So that's what makes Greenhouse different. It's what, for me, has been the pinnacle of my career, where I have really found everything that I've wanted to do to ensure elders live deep, meaningful, purposeful lives. It's what I found in the Greenhouse model.
It seems to make so much sense that, if we are going to make this decision to move to assisted living, we need a little bit more care, that we want to still be in a home setting, right? I mean, the traditional thoughts of going to more of these congregate, almost like, I hate to say it, factories, is really anti, the human condition and the socialization that we know from our own homes and the comfort that we have in making those transitions. But I love the fact too that you chose the greenhouse as the name of the communities, because when we think of a greenhouse, we think of, again, of thriving. We think of growing beautiful things, and that's what you're doing. It's not the end of life, it's just the next phase, right?
Well, exactly. So, I mean, the greenhouse, as you said, greenhouse, one word, growing plants, thriving, beautiful plants. And I've been in greenhouses, the one words, and they create beautiful plants, and it's wonderful. But it's more than that. It's, what's that culture within to really make those plants thrive? And what type of plants are they? We have to know what they are. So it's really analogous to greenhouse. Two words are about growing people. And I think it's always important to say that it's yes to those that will live there, growing people that live there, but it's yes to growing people that work there as well. And
Yeah.
so to really have person-directed living, you've got to have an empowered workforce, person-directed, worker empowered, to really be able to deliver that place where people are growing, where people are thriving. And again, that's what makes Greenhouse so different.
Well, and I want you to expand a little bit on that, because when I did do research on you for my first book, you really created this narrative culture, if you will. And as you mentioned, it's not just for the residents, it's also for the people who are providing the care and overseeing our loved ones on a daily basis. And you have this wonderful story. And I think sometimes we forget that very often we want to belong to something, right? And we want to belong to groups or clubs, or, some people call them tribes or whatever. But you've created this beautiful culture. I'm going to just mention that word Shabazz. I think I'm saying that right, because it really struck me as something very beautiful and wonderful. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, all credit is really needs to be given to Dr. Bill Thomas, who really kind of, in my opinion, is one of the best storytellers and in creating that cultural narrative. And so he really talked about the King's Falcon, which was the Shabazz, and it was this beautiful bird that really had incredible insights into the people in the land in which the king governed and where the king sat. You know, he saw perspective as the big leader and the ruler of the kingdom, if you will. But that Shabazz that was able to be down there, he saw things that were really important in order for that community to live and thrive. And so it was really accessing, you know, kind of the insights of the Shabazz, the royal falcon, who was down there with the people, closest to the people. And it was by empowering and hearing what the Shabazz had to say, and then really creating the support to be able to ensure that that would happen, that the community flourished. And I would tell you that as we have seen this play out in greenhouse homes across the country, we can't keep calling a person a nursing assistant and expect them to have that level of empowerment. Words matter. And so by calling them a Shabazz and by creating that story behind it of what it meant to be truly an empowered member of the team, and the king acknowledging this typically role that has not been seen so much or marginalized or devalued, and now has this esteem. And the king has said this matters, and it's important that we really capture the insights and really create the infrastructure so that that Shabazz is able to deliver what the residents, the community really needs to flourish.
Well, and as you just said, it's not just a designation, it's part of a community. It's being a vital part of that community and having that role. I don't know if there's any anecdotal stories you can tell. I know one that I remember that I thought was, again, just very indicative of flipping the switch, if you will, on how we think about long-term care. In a typical assisted living, you will have the staff bring the residents their medications or whatever for the day. Within the greenhouse project, I had heard stories of some of the Shabazz would actually bring the medications, but it would be on a tea set, and it would be for like afternoon tea, and you'd get your medications, but it also was kind of like this more formal, fun activity. And I just thought, again, it's so easy for us to forget to do things like that take away the fact that we have to take medication or we're vulnerable or whatever, and make it into this really joyful event. So I don't know if you have any other stories, but that one really struck me.
Sure. Yeah. I think I sometimes call it the power of normal and really normalizing what we're doing. It's the deinstitutionalization that I talked about. And, as an example, we don't have med carts in a greenhouse home. We have med boxes in each person's room. And the nurse or the person that would be administering the medications goes to the room. And it's a much more personalized approach to kind of get to the med pass. But I would say life in a greenhouse home, it's, an elder is able to direct his or her day when they wake up, when they're going to get their shower or bath, and they've got a shower right in their room. They can go outside and really just get the fresh air. I think what's interesting during COVID, when everybody's on lockdown, especially in assisted living and nursing homes, they weren't able to leave their rooms. But in a greenhouse home, it was amazing to me. They were all in their private rooms, so they had that level of privacy, if you will, and that physical distancing that was important. But they were able to get outside because they could get from their room out to the backyard, and access to outside is an integral part of what the greenhouse model is. And I think about what occurred because of that access to the fresh air, being outside, being able to move and do those things that are a bit normal. And to the socialization piece, it really enabled people to be able to talk to one another and still be physically distant without being able to, being quarantined to the rooms.
And that's so important. And you pointed out your virtual background is an actual greenhouse living room. And as we can see, it looks like a wonderful living room that anyone would want. And you've got your green plants, you've got your beautiful windows. You can see outside, you can go outside, you can be part of nature. I think we forget about how much our environments help us heal and help us stay healthy and happy. And you've really put, that's equal balance, if you will, to the care that's being provided and the oversight of the residents. You have a program called the Good Life, I think, or is it called the Best Life program? Sorry, the Best Life program. Tell us a little bit more about that and what it's entailed in the Best Life program.
Sure, that's our approach for supporting people living with cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, and related dementias. And, it was important to us. I believe this model is just best practice to support people living with dementia. However, we determined, but what more would we want to do when we discovered through research 85% of those living in greenhouse homes were living with mild to severe cognitive impairment. And so what more do we want to do to ensure they're living their best life? So we partnered with a nurse practitioner, a dementia care specialist, to create our Best Life program. And Best Life is certainly builds on the core values that I talked about: real home, meaningful life, empowered staff, but further, and it has 4 principles that really define what it is. The first one, I've somewhat alluded to it already, and that's the power of normal. And that is normalizing our programs, normalizing our environments, ensuring that people have the opportunity to age-appropriate activities, those things that would be important to them, such as going outside. Maybe it's gardening, maybe it's doing perhaps some baking in the kitchen. There's an open kitchen that they're able to do. There are all sorts of things that are really tailored that are around normalization and those things that you or I experience as part of society. Maybe it's going out to an event that would be important to them. So really rethinking, just because I've got a label that says I have a form of dementia does not mean that I shouldn't have access to those things that are a part of being human. The second one is focus on retained abilities. When someone gets that diagnosis, oftentimes it says, well, they used to be able to, or now they can't do this. But what are those retained abilities, and how do we really engage the human spirit and who that person really is at their core to be able to continue to engage in life? Focus on retained abilities. The third one's interesting, and I can tell you as a nurse that safety was always the primary concern for everything. What's the dignity of risk? And what does it look like in our everyday lives? The types of risk that we encounter, what's the upside and downside of that associated risk? And how do we really think about the human right to engage in some risky preferences? And what must we do to really rethink, well, they've got dementia, they can't do that. So how do we reframe it? And how do we really create, not advocating for throw safety out the window. What I am advocating for is just to use different lens and a different philosophical approach. As an aside, we're working with Penn State School of Nursing researcher Liza Behrens. She has kind of created a dignity of risk manual, and we're really trying to create some protocols and ways that we can really negotiate those risky preferences and really think about what's the quality of life gain by engaging in this risk, and what is the risk for harm. So it gives us a way to think about it so that we can really embrace some of those things. I mean, how often have you been into a community that it's a locked unit or a locked, they can't go here, they can only be in this locked space. So
Yeah.
what would it look like to be able to open those doors and really have that person be able to engage in those activities and things outside that would bring such meaning and high quality of life for them? And the last one is advocacy. And I think with advocacy, as it's really wanting to ensure that that person's voice and who that person is heard, and that person is seen and valued as one with intrinsic worth. No matter that diagnosis, we want to be able to advocate for that person being seen and heard, making sure that they have the ability to connect with those people, those relationships that are important, that they're able to do the things that are important to them.
Mhm.
It's not always easy in our regulated environments, but it's our job to really think about what can we do? How do we advocate? How do we rethink some of these things so that we're able to give them what we call it a best life?
And I love that. And then my background is I do a lot of work with the dementia community and with Alzheimer's. And, one of the things that I've seen anecdotally, I don't know if there's statistics out there around this, but a lot of people who need to make that transition into memory care, it is a much more comforting environment to come into a home, whether that's a board and care, as we call it, I guess, or an environment like the Greenhouse Project, because it's very similar in terms of what they're used to. When you put someone into a large memory care and they come down the stairs to the dining room and there's all these people they don't know, it can be very disconcerting, and there's a lot of issues. So I think it's a wonderful alternative for people to know about, that the Greenhouse Project, communities exist and they're wonderful alternatives, particularly given your special focus on, the best life program. A lot of our listeners are, you know, they're caregivers, or they're working in the field, and we know that there is this desire, if you will, for older Americans to stay living in their homes as long as possible. We all hear that. We see the 8 out of 9 or 9 out of 10, whatever the latest survey is. But the alternative doesn't have to be, again, awful, and it doesn't have to be negative. And I think what you've given is this wonderful transition. But tell us a little bit about how do you address that with families who are concerned about needing to make that change or needing to make that decision, and how is that going to affect their loved one?
Well, I think you've alluded to many of the things that would make it work so well, kind of that smaller environment. We're not going into a large building, as beautiful as that assisted living building or skilled nursing building might be, but we are going into a rural home where you're going to be sharing space with 10, 11 other people. And that's a lot different than going to the big dining room. Instead, you're going to sit at a family table where everybody will come around the family table, where those deep knowing relationships are paramount. It's so important to really get to know who each person is. I'm always amazed at family members who have their loved one in a greenhouse home, and they'll come and have coffee in the morning with their loved one, and they'll kind of get to know the other residents in the home. And then there may be a barbecue at the house, and the family members will come, and it just feels very much like a real family. I can tell you from a personal experience, having parents that have been supported in home care, because we don't have greenhouse homes where they're located. And I think a couple things that I would say: there's caregiver burnout. My father is in Atlanta with his wife, and it's a lot. She has him at home and she's doing a wonderful job caring for him. But I know she gets tired at the end of the day. He's living with some dementia, and it's a lot. And I think about the socialization. That's the other thing. Opportunities for her to get out, but opportunities for him to be able to socialize with others and not to have her be the be all end all to support him in that socialization aspect. So I personally have realized the benefits of really the socialization, our need to connect as community, our need to be with other people, and to just be able to come into an environment that's not that large setting where I'm going down to a dining room where I don't know people, but instead you're coming to a table that you can walk to from your room a few feet, and you can sit at a table with people that you get to know over time, and care partners who know you and are really, they know what you like, and they right there in the kitchen, they can really say, oh, you don't want that. Well, how about this? I know you really like this. Maybe tonight you just feel like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, as an example. And I see that happen all the time in a greenhouse home.
Well, and I think that can't be overlooked. I'm so glad you touched upon the loneliness or social isolation. Sometimes we talk about them. They are different, but we talk about them in the same vein. But we think that, well, if a loved one is living at home alone, they might be more isolated if they're not as mobile. They might be lonely. So moving to assisted living. But, just because you go into a large congregate living doesn't mean you're going to get rid of that loneliness and that
Right.
socialization. And so you're taking it into that step of no, really creating the relationships and the homey environment with the staff, with the other residents. And I think that can't be overlooked. I think that's so important for family caregivers to think about, because it really does help their loved ones thrive. And just because they go into another memory care or something doesn't mean that they won't be lonely. We think that's going to solve
Exactly.
it. Yeah. You touched upon the staff being such an essential piece of what you do, as much as the care that you're providing to the residents. I know there was a study that was done, I think it was a few years ago, but it actually showed that there is so much more satisfaction and less turnover. And again, more of this, I have a really vital role here with the Greenhouse Project, Shabazz and staff. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think, we hear about staffing shortages, we get concerned that maybe people are just there, they're not really impassioned in caring for older loved ones. It's just more of a job. How do you change that? And why is the Greenhouse Project different?
Yeah, so the data that you're referring to is actually data we collected at the end of 2020, which interestingly, as we know, that was the COVID year where everything started and really shook up long-term care, especially pretty dramatically. And we compared our data with 2019 data to traditional nursing homes. And our data, we were far better in terms, our turnover rates were far lower than our traditional counterparts. And we were looking at 2020 data, comparing it to 2019 data, pre-pandemic and during pandemic for us. And so to your point, it's really what we're calling people to. And I think when we're calling people to something that is bigger than they alone could do, it's really calling them to a purpose and to really see them as valued people. This is our workforce I'm referring to, and that we want them to grow just as we want our elders to grow. Sometimes I call it the ABCs of workforce. And A is autonomy, really giving them a bit of autonomy and control for what they're able to do. It's an empowered role. B is belonging, and you talked about belonging. We all have that need to belong to something, and they feel they belong to kind of this network within the home. And C is competence. We're giving them skills that are, some of them are life skills that they haven't had before. Learning new skills from cooking. This is a universal worker, so they're preparing meals. Some are learning to cook. They'll go home and bake a cake for their loved one. They've never done that before, or cook a meal. And they're so excited for what they've learned in that process. So to me, culture has everything to do with retention and really calling people to a purpose and come join us, be a part of something bigger than you alone could do. We're making an impact, and it's around the world.
Yeah. And I think it is a different mindset. When you're, again, in a large environment, whether you're working in an office building and, there's thousands of employees and you feel like you get lost in the numbers, but, or if you're in a more traditional, larger assisted living, it's like, okay, go see Mrs. Smith in, room E3 or 180 or whatever. This is more of you're in a home. These
Yeah,
these are your people, right? And
right.
it's the person that you're caring for, not somebody down the hallway in a room or whatever. I know we're getting close on time. You did mention something, and we're talking to you because it's National Assisted Living Week, and I wanted to highlight the Greenhouse Project for this. But it's also, September is National Emergency Planning Month. You mentioned the locked doors and things, and I always tell family caregivers to ask if they are having a loved one that's moving into any kind of senior living, assisted living situation. Ask about the emergency plans, because no matter where you're at, we're all facing different natural disasters and things. Is there anything you want to share with us that you do or that's important for family caregivers to know in that sense?
I think, what's wonderful about greenhouse homes, most of them are single family homes. It doesn't mean that we don't have some vertical models as well. But, and whether it's family members or life safety inspectors, it's really interesting to me, the 4 exits that are part of a greenhouse home and how easily accessed and grade level egress from the windows. I mean, it's just take a look. Plus, we've got 2 smoke compartments. I mean, the efficiency when it comes to fire, certainly, but the opportunity to evacuate If you're in South Florida and you've got hurricanes to think about, I think there are lots of other things. It was really interesting during one of the hurricanes. I can't remember which one it was, but the shelter in place at the greenhouse community there, and it was a vertical building. It was just a beautiful picture of what can be in the safety that is kind of designed in these homes. And I've had many a conversation with life safety inspectors and fire safety guys, and it's really amazing to me. I've had many of them say, that's the place that I would want for my loved one. So really cool.
And I love that you shared that, because I've told people, if you have an administrator or someone who doesn't want to talk about how they keep your loved ones safe from those types of things, that's not a good place to be. So the fact that you've got your inspectors coming in and you've really thought about this so thoughtfully. Now that we've made everybody fall in love with greenhouse homes, project homes, tell us how many homes there are, kind of where they are, and then I have a follow-up question. But let's start with just where are the homes and if people are interested.
Sure, we've got 401 homes, mostly in the US. We've got 8 homes in South Australia, and the rest of them are across 33 states in the United States.
Okay, great. So I know we're going to talk about your website at the end where people can find those. Now, cost is always an issue, as we know, because a lot of assisted living and this kind of living is not covered necessarily by Medicare or Medicaid and those types of things. So what is the relative cost of the greenhouse project living vis-a-vis maybe other options that families have?
Right. So depending on the state that you're in, depending on whether it's licensed as assisted, the greenhouse home is licensed as assisted or skilled nursing. Many of our greenhouse homes are as skilled nursing. They accept Medicaid. And so they've got as much as 60-70% of those living in a greenhouse home for skilled nursing, depending on the state. Once again, they accept Medicaid. So for assisted living, depending again on the state, and what the surrounding community would be, it might be slightly higher in a greenhouse home. So just worth checking. The majority of our homes are licensed as skilled nursing, just to say about 80% are. And then the rest largely are assisted living.
Okay. And this might be a silly question, but again, even though it's a home environment, you're still paying like your monthly or whatever you would typically do when a loved one moves into assisted living, correct?
Right.
Like and are the rooms both private and semi-private, or are they all private?
All private rooms with an ensuite shower.
Which is fantastic. And people don't know that is very rare.
It is rare, I know, and for me, it means a lot.
It does mean a lot. I know if my mom ever were to choose that, she would definitely want her own shower. So, well, Susan, it's just been wonderful talking to you. I'm so glad we had the opportunity to finally meet,
yes.
virtually at least, and really appreciate you telling us everything about the Greenhouse Project communities and homes. Tell us again, what is the website or information where our listeners can learn more?
Sure. Just go to www.thegreenhouseproject.org.
Wonderful.
Thegreenhouseproject.org.
And we're going to have the link on our episode guide page, so make it really easy for our listeners to find you. But Susan, just want to again thank you again for being our guest on today's episode.
Thanks so much, Sherri. It was my honor.
So wasn't that a great interview with Susan? I think all of us learned so much about the Greenhouse Project, which has been leading this trend called the small house or small home movement when it comes to long-term care. So really interesting to think about. But now I want to segue into Well Home Design news. And as you know, we mentioned with Susan, National Assisted Living Week is September 8th through the 14th. And really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal that I found that there's a lot more older adults now choosing senior living communities because they have really started changing a lot. And by that, I mean, they've started personalizing what they deliver in terms of the amenities, the benefits, the environments, how these communities are built. A lot of them went through a lot of restructuring after the COVID pandemic. And I know a lot of people are still nervous about maybe thinking about having an older loved one in an assisted living. Skilled nursing is a little different because it's almost a requirement, because that means that your loved one really does need higher levels of care than you can probably deliver at home. But assisted living is still where there's a choice, right? And we know that 89%, so almost 9 out of 10 older adults want to stay living in their home. This is where home care becomes so essential. But in both home care and in assisted living, there's a staffing shortage. Susan kind of alluded to that. So, being able to attract people to come into your particular community to care for people becomes really really crucial. But what the Wall Street Journal article found is that, a lot more older adults are saying, hey, you know what? I don't want the hassle of having to deal with, my garden and, a 2 or 3 story home. And I do, maybe I'm living alone and I do feel a little lonely and I do want to be, around people more. I want to have some built-in activities that are just kind of like planned for me, and I can choose, pick and choose what I want to do. But also I can have someone who is monitoring me, if I do have something like AFib, or I've got a pacemaker, or I've got other health issues, and I kind of need a little bit more of having an expert around who can help care for me and help manage my medications. In fact, about 45% of people who go into assisted living very often go into these communities because they do need help with medication management, because we know a lot of our older adults are on anywhere. The average is between usually 6 to 9 different medications at the age of 75, and that goes up, exponentially as you start to get older. You can be on anywhere from 18 to 22 different medications, which I think is way too much, but I'm not going to criticize the medical community. That's between you and your doctor, but it's a lot to manage when you think about dosages and frequencies and time of day, and eat it with food, don't eat it with food, don't drink water before. I mean, that's a lot to figure out. And there's some great apps out there for you family caregivers. I'll do apps on one of our future episodes, because I know a lot of people ask me about those. But anyway, when it comes though to the cost, okay, a lot of people feel like, well, keeping a loved one at home is maybe going to be easier on us financially, because we haven't, mom and dad don't have that much savings or whatever it is. I think it's really important to arm yourself with good information, because again, you need to evaluate what is your time worth that maybe you're spending caregiving for an older loved one. You've got to say, what's my hourly rate? And so what am I giving up in some of this, free caregiving that I'm providing? I mean, ARP did a study on this a couple of years ago, and their estimate was, I think it's over $670 billion a year in free unpaid hours of care that family members, provide. So you have to figure that in if you're working, or even if you're not working, all the other things in your life that you need to maintain, including your self-care. But then also, do you need help from home care agency? Okay, there's a cost there. So how do you look at this in a way where you can really judge by the numbers what might work? Great resource. I'm going to give it to you. It is free. We love free. It's an online tool. It was actually developed by a company called CareScout, which ultimately became a division of the Genworth insurance company. But again, this is free. You don't have to sign up for anything. You don't have to give them your email. You just go to this website, and it's called the Cost of Care Survey. I'm going to have a link on the episode guide page. But what is so great about this is it breaks down, okay, home care, adult daycare, which is great, obviously, for people who have dementia or just, need more social stimulation, but they're still living at home. The assisted living, the skilled nursing, the memory care, private room, semi-private room, lots of details built into this survey. And then what's so great is not only do they give you a national average of what the cost is, and by the way, they update it every March. So every March there's new numbers. It's very up to date in terms of, the economy and what's going on. We know prices on everything are going up. But it breaks it down by state. And this is so valuable, I think, for family caregivers, because if you're living in New York and your loved one's in North Carolina or whatever it is, you need to know what the costs are in that state, or you need to know what, if you want to move mom or dad closer to you, what's the cost then going to be in New York, which is probably going to be maybe a little bit higher cost in Manhattan versus upstate New York and all that. This is a great tool for you. So again, cost of care survey. You can find it by just doing a search and it'll come up, but I'll have that link on the episode guide page. And this is part of our financial wellness. Being able to have balance in life is being able to also have agency and power over your finances and really plan ahead for what you need. And so a lot of this financial wellness is where a lot of us don't feel resilient and we don't feel well. And so just having this knowledge and information is really great for families to share and to talk about and plan ahead for. Now, I mentioned, and I'm going to do this episode on well home design just really quickly, but I mentioned that I took on a project this summer. It was based on a book that my nephew gave me for last holiday season called Swedish Death Cleaning. Some of you may or may not have heard of that term, and you're probably thinking, wow, that sounds really awful. What did you do? Well, clearly I'm still here, so it doesn't have anything to do with death yet. But the whole concept is how you take on this idea that comes from the ancient Vikings, really, but the Swedish culture about downsizing and decluttering and getting rid of things before you're even near that point of death. Before you put it into a will or whatever, get rid of it first. And so I really started thinking about this. I'm getting older and we just accumulate so much stuff in our lives, right? And I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. Why do I have boxes in my attic or boxes in my garage? I never look at them. Why am I keeping this stuff? So I went on this rampage gonzo Swedish death cleaning experiment, and I can't tell you how happy I am. It has made me feel so good because not only do I get to see the pleasure in the faces of, my friends, particularly the daughters, because I'm giving away shoes and I'm giving away bags and, other things, but just to feel like I'm lifting, these things off of me and things are clear in my environment, which we know helps brain health, helps overall health, like, mental and emotional health and wellness. And it's a really fascinating exercise. But the way I did it is I took a little tip from Matt Paxton, and I'm going to have his, he was on season 2. I don't have the episode in front of me, but I'll have a link to his episode. But he's a guru on PBS television that talks about decluttering and, the kind of the Marie Kondo of our world of living longer and having older parents that maybe we're also helping them to downsize and move or whatever it is. But the one thing he shares that really struck me is we hang on to things because of the stories around them and because looking at them reminds us of the story, right? So we don't get rid of stuff because of the story, but it's not doing us any good if it's in a box in the attic because we're not remembering that story until we see it again. So the whole point of what Matt talks about is take a picture of this thing that you love, and then you can keep it in a photo book or you can have it on your phone. But now you can get rid of it because it's not doing any good. It's cluttering up your environment, but you can still share the story, share the memory that you had, whether it's with others or just with yourself. And the other episode I'm going to include is artifacts, because we talked to the great folks at Artifacts, and Artifacts is also a great company that will help you do this. They will help you take those photos, tell those stories, archive a lot of your good information. And so you're going to want to really check that episode out because that also is very helpful in learning how to do this. But I really feel good. I wanted to share that with you because it was an experiment. I wasn't sure. I'm like, oh, can I really get rid of my cheerleading outfit from 7th grade or, my Barbie doll? I think I did keep a few Barbie dolls. I had a Snoopy phone, but here's the other great thing. And this plays into financial wellness. So not only am I doing the Swedish death cleaning, which is helping out my mental health, but my Snoopy phone is going for $175 on eBay. So cha-ching I'm going to take some of this stuff I've hung on to for all these years, and I'm going to put them up on eBay and, help pay my utility bills or whatever it is. But that's the other upside of doing some of this is once you let it go, you can also find out what the value is. And hey, who knows? I've got some really cool stuff that I'm selling. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you because I thought it was valuable and it was something I experienced myself. And that was at least my experience. I know it does take time. I dedicated, time, but I would plot it out just like a meeting. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing this, for a couple hours. If you need to really tackle it, and there's a lot, do it one drawer at a time. Don't think I'm going to do the whole garage in one day. Take one drawer in the kitchen because that's what I did. And then you just feel great. That one drawer is done. Move on to the next drawer the next day. So it is a slower process, but that is kind of the principles of Swedish death cleaning is you want to take the time to thoughtfully go through things. You don't want it to be all in one rush, in the minutes before you die. And you also, there's joy in seeing the happiness of being able to share things with people before you're gone. So anyway, that's kind of the concept of it. And I just wanted to share that with you. Now, my final thing for our Well Home Design News is when September 11th happened, it hit me really profoundly. I was in my 30s, early 30s, working for a company. I got stranded in Chicago. I was desperate to get home to my family in California. Me and a colleague wound up renting a car and driving Route 66 to get home because, of course, they grounded the planes for at least a day or two, I think, is what it wound up being. But anyway, it hit me very profoundly. But then when I started writing and I started interviewing a lot of people that were at the pile in downtown Manhattan there, or people who had been at the Pentagon, or Shanksville, Pennsylvania, some of the families, and I started talking to people, it really struck me that we need to not forget. And I think about my grandparents who lived through, World War II, but certainly were around when Pearl Harbor happened. We had 3 of our family members who signed up who were in the military for World War II. And now you think about, I think almost just a handful of our World War II veterans are left. And a lot of people don't even know the stories. They don't even realize what Pearl Harbor meant. We don't commemorate Pearl Harbor Day anymore. And so these things get forgotten. And the unfortunate thing about history is once we forget, we repeat. And so I think it's really important, and I'm just going to play my role in never forgetting. It's a promise I made on that day and have made ever since. And I did do some really great interviews with some of the first responders, particularly around research about the toxic debris that was at the pile at Ground Zero. These first responders were breathing it in, and they have now developed cognitive decline similar to Alzheimer's. Their brains look similar to an Alzheimer's brain in that it has atrophied and the cells have died, and they are having a lot of cognitive issues in their 50s and 60s that are similar to people who might be in their 80s and 90s with Alzheimer's. So we know how important our environments are in our health and our longevity. And I think it's just a great reminder not to forget September 11th and what happened to us and how we came together as a nation, something it's hard to imagine today we're so polarized, but also that our environments are really important, and having those clean air care type environments and thinking about the things that we can do to be out in good fresh air and all of that is really key. So I just wanted to do a shout out to all of those first responder families, all the survivors of 9/11, all the people who fight every day to keep reminding us of 9/11. And just, oh, by the way, the latest statistic is that more people have died since 9/11 who were involved in it. So whether you were working downtown and you escaped the dust cloud that was happening, whether you're a first responder on the pile, we now have, as of this last month, August 2024, 4,343 survivors and first responders of 9/11. Many of them, however, have died. I'm sorry, that's the number of deaths of people who survived that day 23 years ago, but have now died from cancers and gastro problems and have cognitive issues. And again, it's all because of the trauma and the toxins and the debris and everything that they suffered through on that horrific day. So a shout out to never forget September 11th. September 11th. And with that, we're going to go to our Me Time Monday Wellness Hack. And as I promised, we're going to talk about the Me Time Monday program, how it can work for you. Again, not a lot of time. Make sure you focus on yourself and make sure you've got balance, and let's get that Monday routine going. So here it is. Welcome to our Me Time Monday Wellness Hack on how the Me Time Monday program works. Me Time Monday has 3 parts. Me, which is the first part, is what do you value? But also, do you have balance in your life in the 7 elements of wellness: physical, emotional, social, intellectual, environmental, financial, and spiritual? The second part is time. It only takes 7 minutes a day, or even just 7 minutes a week if you're an overwhelmed, busy caregiver. Finding 7 minutes a week and building from there is very empowering. And finally, Monday. You need to create change, then you need to create a routine. Something that's easy, but that consistently reminds you to stick to your goal. So step 1 is the me in Me Time Monday. And there's a word, ikigai, that is a Japanese word that means a reason for being. This is really part of the Me Time Monday program. It's about really focusing on what brings you joy, a smile to your face, a happy heart and soul. Some people define it as your passion, what you love, plus your mission, what you need, and your special skill, or what you're good at. But really, it's not about what I should do, but what I get to do. It's tapping into your inner child and a sense of wonder and being carefree. And it's not being selfish, it's being self-full. It's creating a meaningful life with the emphasis on me. And it doesn't promote guilt, or it shouldn't, but it rather should promote gratitude. The gratitude for the relationships and the life that you had. And even though there are challenges, they are challenges you can face and overcome with just a little bit of focus and a little bit of help. Step 2 is about time. Now, we know there's a power of 7, as I write in my book, 7 days in the week, 7 colors in the rainbow, and 7 minutes a day of self-care or me time, or what I call microflows, are really baby steps. It's about taking small, simple steps that will bring you to success in your self-care routine. So 7 minutes is really all it takes. You can break those up during the week. You can just start with 7 minutes a week and build from there. But remember to start slow, because that'll make you feel more empowered and more successful as you go along. And really what we want you to do is not feel like your time impoverished, which I know a lot of family caregivers feel. They have no time to find 20 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes to go do certain things that might bring you some me time, promise and happiness. This is 7 minutes. We're very capable of just taking 7 minutes just for ourselves. And one technique that I think is really interesting is the art of habit stacking. Now that's where you take something that you already do as part of your daily routine, and, it's something you don't think about. It's not a choice. So I chose brushing my teeth every morning. But I wanted to do more stretching. So while I brush my teeth, I now also stretch my legs by throwing a leg up on the counter on each side. And now I get stretching in while I'm also brushing my teeth in the morning. Those are really easy ways for us to get a little bit of me time, or something we want to do that we haven't gotten to, into our daily routines without feeling we have to spend a lot of extra time doing it. And then finally, the Monday. Step 3 is the science of Monday, and it's really about creating a weekly rhythm and routine. Monday is part of our cultural DNA. It's the start of new things every week. In fact, a Johns Hopkins study showed people were more successful creating healthier behaviors if they start on a Monday and then check in with themselves every week to make it a routine. So it's not a New Year's resolution. It really becomes a way of life. And 64% of those people in that Johns Hopkins study said they had a positive frame of mind on Mondays, and they were more likely to stay positive for the rest of the week. So Monday became their day of reward and reset and checking in and celebrating the little successes that they'd had during the week. It's really important because you get 52 Mondays in the year. So it beats out one New Year's resolution that you have to stick to. You keep getting new challenges and new chances to practice your self-care. And adopting a Me Time Monday routine gets rid of the Sunday scaries and blurs days because Monday becomes your day. It's not about really a deadline, it's about a weekly check-in. And you don't have to practice your wellness on a Monday. You just have to plan it. And then also reflect and reset or reward yourself on Monday so that you keep that rhythm going. And finally, I wanted the Me Time Monday program to feel joyful, which is why the color is to prompt you to mix it up when it comes to your wellness. When you invest in your wellness, you're creating your personal joy economy, as I call it. Now, mixology is a science of bartenders and cocktails. They like to dream up new ways to use the same basic ingredients and mix it up and shake it up. And that is how you should think of Me Time Monday. It is your joy economy mixology. So maybe on Monday or Tuesday, you choose social wellness or getting 7 minutes more of sleep. Maybe on a Wednesday or Thursday, you can take a few minutes for an emotional rescue moment or a digital detox or a little bit of meditation. Maybe on Friday, you focus on your intellectual or financial wellness. And maybe on Saturday or Sunday, you think about your spiritual wellness, or flip that all, into a mixer and decide on what day or what week you're going to practice these 7 elements of wellness that you have in your life. Feel free to make it your own. And again, start off slow, maybe one element for 7 minutes this week. And then you'll feel successful and empowered, and you'll be inspired to do more, like cross-training for a joyful life. I hope you've enjoyed this Me Time Monday wellness hack. And this is all from my book, Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life, which you can find online and in stores. You can also learn more about the book and my Me Time Monday workshops at caregivingclub.com or metimemonday.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Caregiving Club On Air. Please hit the subscribe button to listen to us on our newest channels, Amazon Music, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, Pandora, as well as Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, and other listening channels. Check out all the resources and article links on our episode guide page found at caregivingclub.com. Just hit the podcast tab at the top, or email us with comments and questions at podcast@caregivingclub.com. Thank you again for listening. Take care and stay well.